Mr. Stewart, I don't get it. I studied for 5 hours, but I still failed the test. I was looking at the questions and I was like, I know this one, but I couldn't figure it out. Am I doomed as a learner? No, dear student, and no, dear colleague, when you hear this, your students aren't doomed. What they're suffering from is the familiarity trap. In this video, what it is, why it's bad, and how to fix it. So what the heck is this familiarity trap? It is a observed phenomenon. It's mentioned in the research on cognitive science. It's not something unique to just some kids. It's a human thing. To explain it, I'm just going to read from page 89 of my book, These 6 Things, where I treat this common student hangup. In cases like I described at the start of this video, the student is confused about the difference between learning and familiarity. If something's learned, it can be produced, or in the case of a skill, executed by the learner without any aid. Successful learning ends with, I can do it myself. Familiarity, on the other hand, is what happens after we experience an initial lesson on a topic, or after we read something for the first time, or take notes, or reread those notes, or reread the textbook. The tricky thing is that the more times we do familiarity-producing things, like those that I just listed, the more we experience the, quote, illusion of competence. And that comes from Bork and Coryat's 2005 article, Illusions of Competence in Monitoring One's Knowledge During Study. So when you're under this illusion of competence, this what I call familiarity trap, it feels like we've built knowledge, but we haven't. So the familiarity trap is super bad because you think you're doing something productive when you're doing the things that produce familiarity. So for many students, even all the way up into college, when they study, they are actually just doing familiarity producing things. They are doing things like rereading the textbook, rewatching the lectures, going over their notes, which is usually just them reading over their notes. And what these things train your brain to do is to kind of like know where to find information in these sources, your textbook or your notes or your lecture videos. They don't actually train you to know this information yourself. And so you can spend a lot of time doing all of these familiarity producing things as a student. It can feel very laborious, and it is quite laborious and honestly pretty boring. And it can even start to feel exciting because you begin to gain all this familiarity. But then when a test requires you to actually know the information for yourself and you don't have the notes, you don't have the lecture, you don't have the textbook, now you come up with the, I know this one, but I can't think of it phenomenon. You've been duped by familiarity. Your foot has been caught in its trap. And so the way to fix the familiarity trap is to do things that force you to know information rather than just be familiar with it or where it can be found. There are some really simple ways to beat this trap. The most prominent of which is quizzing. Somehow, some way, students need to quiz themselves on the material that they are learning. I love to facilitate quizzes like this in my daily warm-up. When class starts, I will ask students some short answer questions that relate to previously learned material. And I tell my students that the purpose of these prompts is to show them have they really learned it. If they can answer the prompt with specificity and clarity, then they've really learned that material. But if they can't, if they have to go back to their notes, then they're still in the process of learning it. And I tell them that just because I'm giving you these quizzes doesn't mean that you can't give yourself these quizzes. It is way better to go back through our warm-ups and quiz yourself with those as a method for studying for my tests than it is to just reread your notes, go over the textbook, and so on. And I teach my students, these get you in the familiarity trap. I talk to them about the experience that you can have on a test where you feel like you know it, but you don't know it. And I say, that's familiarity. That's what happens when you do more passive familiarity producing actions. What you need to do is quiz yourself. So there are other methods for doing this. I sometimes create Quizlet sets for key vocab for a unit. Once in a while, we may do a Kahoot. Pop-up debates are another really good way to have students reviewing material and coming up with answers on their own. So like a pop-up debate prompt that helps review is, what's the most important concept from unit blank? And then the students have to come up with an answer, and they have to listen as their peers are coming up with answers and put their idea against their ideas, and this forces students to really understand the material for themselves versus just to have it something written in their notes days or weeks ago. So the good news, colleague, is that the familiarity trap is not inevitable, but until our students get enough modeling, facilitating, reinforcing of effective quiz-like review practices, they're going to keep getting caught in the trap. So let's go teach the heck out of this idea, the familiarity trap, with our students, and let's give them lots of low-stakes quiz-like situations where they can see if they really know the material. Until next time, cheers.